Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're here today because, well, we are about to put one of the most famous, influential, and honestly, hotly debated moral frameworks in human history through an absolute philosophical stress test. That's right, we are taking a deep dive into utilitarianism.
Before we really get into the weeds, I want you to stop and think about this core question. Can human morality be solved with a simple mathematical equation? Seriously, can we literally just calculate right and wrong? Because that is the bold, foundational premise we're unpacking today. We're going to see how this theory is built, how it actually applies to our day-to-day lives, and most importantly, where it brilliantly succeeds and where it completely falls apart.
All right, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll kick things off with the pursuit of moral pleasure, move into the pleasure-pain calculus, and then test the whole thing out in parts 3, 4, and 5 by looking at qualitative pleasure, the problem of justice, and human rights. Finally, we'll see how the theory evolves with the rule utilitarianism fix. Basically, we're going to build this intellectual framework up from the ground, try to break it, and then see how it adapts.
Okay, let's dive right in with Section 1, the pursuit of moral pleasure and the pursuit of happiness. To really understand utilitarianism, we've got to dig into its roots.
What's super fascinating here is just how simple and frankly intuitive this core definition really is. At its very foundation, utilitarianism is built on hedonism. Now that's just the idea that the ultimate good for human beings is pleasure. It's pretty straightforward. Pain is bad, pleasure is good. It's an objective fact of the human experience, right? Therefore, ACT utilitarianism says that every single time we make a decision, we absolutely must choose the action that maximizes pleasure and happiness for the greatest number of people. It's an incredibly appealing, really easy to grasp standard for morality.
And we can actually trace the evolution of this idea starting way back in ancient Greece with Epicurus. He's the guy who really championed basic hedonism. But, it wasn't until the 18th century that a philosopher named Jeremy Bentham took this ancient idea and basically founded modern utilitarian thought. Then, following him in the 19th century, we get John Stuart Mill, who stepped up to become the most famous defender and really the refiner of the entire theory.
All right, let's move right along to Section 2, the pleasure-pain calculus and the attempt at calculating morality. Let's look at how Bentham took this philosophy and literally tried to turn it into a hard science.
So Bentham lived during a time when science and mathematics were just exploding, and he figured, hey, why not apply that rigid scientific logic to ethics? So he actually invented a literal calculus using 7 criteria. To judge any action, you measure its pleasure or pain by its intensity, like how strong is it? Duration, how long is it going to last? Certainty, how likely is the outcome? Propinquity, which is just a fancy word for how soon it will happen. Fecundity, will it trigger more of that same feeling? Purity, is the pleasure mixed with pain? And finally, extent, just how many people are actually affected.
Let's apply this calculus to a highly relatable thought experiment. Imagine you desperately need an $80 textbook for a class, but you just can't afford it. So you think about stealing your neighbor's copy. Okay, let's run the math. Step 1, you gain a minor short-term pleasure from saving some cash. Step 2, if you have a conscience, you're going to suffer a severe, long-duration pain of guilt. Step 3, your neighbor experiences the immediate, totally certain pain of losing their property, and maybe other people even feel psychological pain just knowing a thief is on the loose. Step 4, tally the whole thing up. The math results in a massive net negative. Therefore, stealing the book is mathematically and morally wrong.
Now, here is the crucial and honestly surprisingly radical point. This calculus is incredibly egalitarian. Everyone's pain and pleasure gets counted equally. In fact, Bentham even applied this exact math to animals. He argued that because a dog or a cow can very clearly experience pain and pleasure, they literally have to be included in our moral calculus. This mathematical logic actually helped spark the modern animal rights movement, which, if you think about it, was a deeply radical concept back in the 18th century.
But here is where we need to introduce our first major stress test. Let's look at Section 3, a doctrine worthy of swine, testing the theory.
So, critics almost immediately attacked Bentham's theory. They argued, look, if the absolute highest good in life is just experiencing physical pleasure, doesn't that put human beings on the exact same moral level as a pig wallowing in the mud? Well, John Stuart Mill stepped in to defend the theory by dividing our experiences into lower and higher pleasures. Eating a fast food burger or playing a mindless video game. Those are lower, brute sensations. But humans have higher cognitive and emotional faculties, right? We can enjoy a complex game of chess, read Dostoevsky, or feel that really profound joy of seeing justice served.
Mill argued that these are qualitatively superior pleasures.
Mill actually anchored this defense in an incredibly punchy, super famous quote. He said, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied." The point he's making is that even when we're experiencing pain or dissatisfaction, our state of being is just superior, simply because we possess the capacity for these higher, much more complex emotions.
And Mill also offered a highly practical formula for a happy life. He basically said, you really shouldn't go around seeking constant thrills. Instead, a truly satisfied life requires mostly tranquility with just occasional bursts of excitement. And if you find yourself bored or dissatisfied, Mill prescribes 2 specific cures: mental cultivation, meaning getting an education, exploring the world, and unselfishness. Caring for others and learning new things are, in his view, the ultimate cures for an unsatisfied life. So, utilitarianism is sounding pretty fantastic so far, right? But let's move to Section 4, the problem of justice, and explore when the math fails. Because guys, this is where the foundation really starts to crack.
First up, we have the application problem. Utilitarianism is what's called a consequentialist theory. That means it judges right and wrong entirely based on future outcomes. But here's the thing. Humans are not omniscient. We simply cannot flawlessly predict the future. I mean, how many times have you made a choice and then later said, "Man, if I'd only known that was going to happen, I never would have done it"? A purely forward-looking ethic is just inherently unstable because our ability to predict the future is, well, it's incredibly limited.
But the truly fatal flaw might actually be how the math handles justice. Take a look at this honestly chilling thought experiment that gets discussed a lot in ethics classes. Imagine a community of 30 people. 2 people are randomly selected, let's say whoever happens to have a birthday this week, to be the slaves for the other 28. These 2 are forced to do all the laundry, all the cooking, all the chores. Now, run the calculus. The 2 slaves suffer deeply, let's call it a -10 in pain. But the 28 free people experience immense pleasure from never having to do chores, a +5 each. Mathematically, 28 people gaining 5 points of pleasure massively outweighs the 20 total points of pain suffered by the 2. The math actually results in a net positive. Pure utilitarianism is completely blind to inherent justice. It can literally justify random slavery as long as the math works out.
And that brings us straight into Section 5, Rights and Overwhelming Demands, where we look at more fatal flaws.
Let's look at personal rights through another scenario. What if a peeping Tom spies on someone through a window, but is incredibly careful and never ever gets caught? The victim never knows, so they experience absolutely zero pain. The peeping Tom, on the other hand, actually gains pleasure. If you rely solely on pleasure-pain consequences, this massive violation of the human right to privacy is technically defensible under strict utilitarianism. The theory just completely ignores fundamental human rights.
Furthermore, the theory really struggles with what philosophers call supererogatory acts. Now, these are those wonderfully good actions that go way above and beyond the call of beauty. But utilitarianism? It doesn't recognize that distinction at all. According to the theory, it is your absolute binding duty to maximize pleasure in every single waking moment of your life. To see why that's such a huge problem, consider this. Under strict utilitarian demand, you are morally obligated to give literally all your free time to a soup kitchen or a charity. You shouldn't own extra clothes. You shouldn't have expendable income. Taking time for personal leisure is considered morally wrong because you aren't maximizing global happiness. But in human reality, we recognize that spending thousands of hours training to play the piano or becoming a great athlete is a beautiful, entirely morally appropriate pursuit. Basically, ACT utilitarianism places totally crushing, totally impossible demands on our daily existence. So, if ACT utilitarianism justifies injustice, ignores human rights, and demands the impossible, do we just throw the whole thing away? Well, not entirely. Let's move to our final section, the rule utilitarianism fix, fixing the framework.
To fix these broken philosophical rules, later thinkers evolved the theory into what's known as rule utilitarianism. And the fix is basically this. Instead of agonizing over the calculus of every single individual act we perform, we should instead evaluate and establish broad, general rules for society. We choose the overarching rules that, if followed by everyone, will maximize the greatest pleasure for the greatest number. A perfect, real-world example of this in action is the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Think about it. This document is essentially a massive social contract. The founders laid down a set of strict rules, like the right to privacy, which prevents things like our peeping Tom scenario, and the right to freedom, which prevents our birthday slave scenario.
We agree to abide by these overarching rules because they give society as a whole the absolute best chance at widespread happiness and stability. Rule utilitarianism creates a protective framework that the original act utilitarianism severely lacked.
Wow, we have covered an incredible amount of ground today, from ancient hedonism and strict mathematical calculus to the defense of higher human pleasures, all the way to the chilling realization that pure math can sometimes justify grave injustice, and finally to the societal fix of rule utilitarianism. I want to leave you with one final thought as you go about your life today, making decisions both large and small. What framework truly guides your own moral compass? Are you secretly doing utilitarian math in your head, or are you following inherent rules? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you next time.